Hi, I'm Naomi Chavez, and this is PVSS, Strengthening Families for a Better Future class. We've been talking about understanding ACEs and their impact on us as adults and what we can do about it now. So tonight we're on the class on drug and alcohol abuse. We're going to be doing two parts, one part English, one part Spanish, and you should have received two links for last week, and you'd be caught up now. So when you watch them, don't forget to take your notes and turn them into the staff. That's all we're asking, and make sure that you verify that you did take the class and that you took your notes and what you're learning, and just turn in your notes. So drug and alcohol abuse in the household and the effects on the family. In this series that we're doing, it's 10 weeks of classes. We're doing a series raising awareness on these different subjects. And so we're not talking in detail on each subject, but it's more of the impact and the effect on the family and on the children, and how they affect as adults also. So we're going to get right into the class and the many ways that addiction affects the family. In my family, we have a history of dealing with different types of abuse, and so we're going to be talking about how it also can be you may have a predisposition for it, and it continues. It's like a cycle that may continue. So the many ways addiction affects the family, and the battling the substance abuse disorder is viewed by many as a personal experience. So normally and usually when somebody is sent to go and get educated on alcohol or substance abuse, or by the time they have to go to a program, a counseling program or AA program, it's more focusing on the individual that is battling the addiction. And in this class, we're going to be looking at the ways that it affects the family as a whole. So because of harmful substance abuse has a devastating effect on the user, many may not even take into consideration other people directly involved. And in this class, we want to consider the whole family unit as a whole and how the family is affected. So things like how addiction affects the family, the partners, the children, and parents who witness a family member struggling with addiction. So if somebody or you yourself is struggling with an addiction of a substance abuse, whether it be alcohol, whether it be drugs, of course we want them to seek help. But for the sake of this class, we want to get a little bit more into how it affects the family. And a lot of times, we get people that end up coming to counseling or end up seeking help, and they don't really comprehend how it's affecting the whole family. So we want to talk about a few things in this class regarding that. Truth is that the whole family suffers. It's not going to be just the individual. When an individual in a family is going through a battle of addiction in some shape, way, or form, it's going to affect every member in the family. And it's good to learn and understand that if you're the one that is dealing with it or have dealt with it in the past, to have an awareness, that the whole family needs help and not just the individual. Because if you grew up in a home, hence the ACEs, you had this experience as a child, there's many different ways that this could have affected your own personal life, because the truth is that the whole family gets affected. Like I said, the emotional damage as well as the financial, the legal, the medical, and there's other consequences also. We know that when a family is suffering with substance abuse or alcohol abuse, it's very common to see that the financial situation is not going to be good. They may have legal problems, they may have gotten in trouble through a DUI, they may have gotten some kind of trouble with the law, being in their influence. So legal issues can accumulate in the family also. Medical problems, because they may have already been developing symptoms, side effects from the abuse of the drugs or the alcohol, and now they're facing some health issues or medical issues and other consequences in general. So I have a brother who's now passed away, and he was an alcoholic at a very young age. He began drinking. He was a drug addict as a teenager, and went through his whole life, trying to get over, his substance abuse. Unfortunately, his health started to deteriorate. He got cirrhosis of the liver from the alcohol. He started getting infections and blood infections. Different things occurred to him due to his drug use. And eventually he did end up homeless on the streets, and it was very, very traumatic to the whole family. And he ended up passing away from substance abuse, literally, because the substance abuse and the alcohol took a toll on him. And it's very traumatic and, experience to see a loved one suffering and struggling through addiction. And he did start, at a very young age, and it was a lifetime battle for him. It finally, took his life, and was very, very sad for the whole family. So the whole family suffers the emotional damage that takes place. We had financial problems because well, not myself personally, but he had accumulated a lot of financial problems. And then once he was passed, that they didn't go away. They were still calling. The bill collectors are calling. Just a lot of things that he left a trail of. So it affects the whole family. My mom, my mother, she was suffering of depression because of the loss of her son. And she would say to us, I'm not supposed to bury my kids first. They're supposed to bury their parents. So we see that the whole family, and this is just one personal story I'm sharing a little bit with you, but I have seen many, many families devastated and impacted as a whole, the whole family, because of the substance abuse in the household. The effects of drug and alcohol abuse and or addiction can be both short-term or long-term. Many homes can be divided by the stress and the strain that is caused by the drug and the alcohol abuse. So we also see the breakdown of the family unit. What happens, a lot of times is that there's so much stress, there's so much strain that is being caused by the drug and alcohol abuse in the household, that you see the family begin to just break down and divide, and it just starts to bring a lot of pain and suffering into the household. Conflict becomes a normal part of home life as family members fight to overcome the abuse or deal with a family member who is battling addiction. So we see conflict, lots of conflict in the home. If you have a couple and, one of them is a substance abuse user, again, we're talking about alcohol, we're talking about self-medicating, prescription drugs, we're talking about cocaine, we're talking about heroin. And in other classes, we will break down, one by one, all the different addictions and how they affect the brain and how they affect the body. But in this class tonight, we want to talk about as a whole how substance abuse affects and what kind of impact it has on the family itself. So when members are fighting to overcome, it's very difficult, and it's a big strain on the whole family because of the member who is battling addiction impacts and affects the rest of the household. Trust begins to break down. And we also know that secrecy and hiding their disorder becomes a part of daily life. And just the lying, there's a cycle of lying that takes place. The user begins to hide the ways they're spending money. They start to hide the effects when they're under the influence, and they could be asked, why are you acting different? Why are you talking different? And denial is a big part of addiction also. So they're denying, the use or how far in they're already in the addiction and the disease. So a lot of times you're going to see that the trust begins to break down because as the family members begin to find out about the lies, the trust is not there. Little by little, the trust begins to get deteriorated. And that's another way that substance abuse and alcohol abuse, in the household affects the family. Trust begins to break down, and it becomes a part of the daily life, the lying and the secrecy. It all becomes a part of daily life. And then aggression may break out amongst the family members dealing with the issue in the home. So you're going to see a lot of anger in the home. You're going to see a lot of fighting, a lot of bickering in the home due to, the lies and the not being able to trust the family member. Couples may end their relationship due to changes caused by the addiction. So there is a lot of separation, a lot of divorce, because couples can and will end up separating. Their relationship will be destroyed caused by the addiction. So addiction will impact the couple's relationship in a way that eventually can break it down to total separation. Family communication becomes more difficult and strained due to frustration. So we're seeing how, the impact begins to cycle out of control, the pattern of it, how it continues. It goes from one thing to another thing. So family communication becomes more difficult and strained due to the frustration that is taking place. I deal with people in counseling and things like that, and we get phone calls, and to hear, the desperation in the voice of a mother, of a wife, a family member that is calling about another family member, and they're just so frustrated trying to get help for their loved one, and the loved one is in denial. The loved one is not ready to change. The loved one, continues to lie. The loved one is hiding and being secretive about things, and it's just such a frustrating situation in the household. Family members are also affected when they see their family members enduring the side effects. So as the family or the household has a member in the household that is an addict already, or is abusing, alcohol, drugs, then you begin to see the side effects in that member. And many, depending on what drug of choice they're using, can range from severe symptoms, mild symptoms of severe symptoms, things like, flying into rages when they're under the influence or of alcohol, or when they have the need for drugs, when they're going through a time of withdrawal, when they're going through all the uncomfortable symptoms of the withdrawal. And like I said, at a later class, we'll be able to go back and talk about, the details of why, certain symptoms of withdrawal occur in the body based on which drug they're using. Right now, we're talking again more about awareness. Raising an awareness of to strengthen the family for a better future has to do with understanding how the whole family is being impacted at times due to the abuse of alcohol and drugs. So things like seeing them lose weight rapidly, becoming unrecognizable. Some may not hear from a loved one for an extended period of time, only to discover that they are living on the street, or worse, they have a fatality, a car accident, because they were under the influence, or an overdose. And again, it hits home for me, and I'm going to talk one more time about my brother. This kind of details the process we went through with him. He started off as when he was young, smoking cigarettes, smoking marijuana. He eventually went to alcohol, then later to drugs, and eventually leaving home, running away, as an adult, broken relationships, losing those relationships due to his lying and secrecy, all of the symptoms. And then suddenly he'd disappear, as an adult, not knowing where he was, only to find out that he was literally already living on the streets in different cities, and his health deteriorating, overdoses, numerous times in the hospital. And again, like I said, to eventually it took his life. And so this is how it can impact severely a family, things like I just mentioned. And it's very, very devastating. Such shock can cause severe trauma and could cause family members to develop unhealthy coping mechanisms themselves. So when a household is being affected because of the substance abuse and the alcohol abuse, the user in the house, it can lead to severe trauma. When family members, especially children, and a wife or a husband are watching the family member go through all of these stages, it can take a toll on them, and such shock can cause them to find unhealthy ways of coping themselves. And we had another class, we were talking about emotional eating. We were talking, that sometimes people will eat over their emotions. So family members can begin to develop their own coping mechanisms. They could overspending, also having a lot of anger issues, yelling, fighting with the member of the household that's using substance abuse. Also, we can, like I said, develop eating disorders. Just so many other coping mechanisms that can develop in the family household, overworking, shopaholics, different things that can they themselves take on the other family members. They'll develop these unhealthy coping mechanisms because they're dealing with the shock and the trauma of dealing with a family member who is also, with substance abuse issues. So how does drug and or alcohol abuse affect children in the household? When a child grows up in a home where the parent is abusing alcohol and or drugs, the studies like we've been talking about ACEs, the studies like ACEs that show that witnessing the trauma of a parent suffering from addiction at a young age has long-term effects on that child. So when the children are very little and they're growing up in these homes of people that are abusing alcohol, drugs, there's this abuse going on in the home and there's addiction going on in the home and they're growing up watching this, it's very, very probable that they will have long-term effects on a child, and the studies are now proving that. So children are more likely to develop substance abuse disorders in their adulthood. The ACEs study shows that children that were raised in homes, where they experience these things, they grow up and as adults they will experience them themselves. They are also 3 times more likely of being neglected physically or sexually abused when growing up in a home where there's substance abuse. Seeing a parent like this often also creates very distressing emotions for the child, which not only can create delays in learning and their development, but also prolonged mental emotional disorders. So you're going to see, the impact, the effect as time passes. And another thing the studies show very clearly is that these children, they do develop learning disabilities, learning and developmental, delays and prolonged mental problems. Children also are high risk for learned behaviors. In this case, very negative ones, since they are still learning and developing. Children, they're learning, they're developing all the time on a daily basis. Their personality traits, they run the risk of developing and repeating such behaviors as the substance abuse and the aggression or even the violent behavior due to a parent or both parents' drug use. So this is very I'm talking about raising awareness. Now, you might have been a person that is identifying with what I'm talking about because maybe you grow up in this kind of environment, or maybe you yourself, have had a history of substance abuse, or you had a parent, that had a history of substance abuse, a family member of substance abuse, and maybe some of these things you can identify with already, but it's also a preventative measure also to know the risks involved, to know that if, there is a family history, maybe you want to learn to educate your children about prevention. Let them know that there is a predisposition in your family, that the grandfather or the father, and there was patterns of people that have dealt with substance abuse, because in the long term, the effects can be very traumatic for children. And whatever we can do to strengthen our families for a better future through education and educating them, that's what we want to do. So when there's arguments between parents, they become something normal of the home where there's substance abuse. Arguments between parents may be normal on the daily basis, but they cause the child emotional distress because as they witness the family members fighting, that is very traumatic on the child. And like we mentioned earlier, fighting can become a daily thing where there is substance abuse in the household and will affect the whole family. Other symptoms children may develop are that when there's exposure to these substance abuse issues in families, they cause a child to feel emotionally and physically neglected and unsafe. So we don't, we want our children, they need to be able to feel, a child needs to feel emotionally stable in his home. He needs to be physically stable in his home, not feeling neglected and unsafe. But unfortunately, it's shown that in houses where there's substance abuse, they are more prone to have these issues. So as a result, they can become more mentally and emotionally unstable hence therefore the ACEs, as a result of the early childhood experiences, the adverse childhood early experiences that they're experiencing as children. As a result, they can become more mentally and emotionally unstable. So children could develop symptoms like extreme guilt, blaming themselves, thinking that all the problems in the house, is their fault. A lot of times we hear children that are impacted in the homes with substance abuse or dysfunction, and the children ask quite frequently, what did they do wrong, or what are they doing wrong? And they can develop extreme guilt, self-blame, like we're saying, blaming themselves, feelings of unworthiness, and dysfunctional attachments in adulthood. So we see that little girls that grow up, under an alcoholic father, abusive father, a father that was a drug abuser, a lot of times they'll grow up and they'll have an attachment to these same very type of people, same personality, same dysfunctions, and there's cycles that begin. So we want to educate and get help as early as possible what's going on in the home, and also educate about these things so that the families, are better prepared for a better future. In extreme cases, children can be removed from the home and placed in foster care. It's another risk that is ran when there is substance abuse going on in the household, and the effects of it on the family are that, these children can and will be removed and placed into foster care, which would only add more trauma. Because you can only imagine, a child as dysfunctional as they may be growing up in a household, it's all they know. And to suddenly be yanked out of there and be placed with strangers, and everyone else might think is the best thing for the child, but it will be a very traumatic experience for children. If you've ever experienced this yourself, or you've had your own children to have to be removed, there's hope. There's always hope, but it starts with education. It starts with getting help. It starts with getting support and breaking these cycles, through education. In the home, it also can be that they're being affected by a teenager who is doing the abuse of the alcohol and or the drugs. So minors underage drinking is common in the home with minors, and marijuana has been a common used substance. It's rising now and more acceptable now due to the medical use of marijuana and the medical benefits. But when it's recreational and it turns into an addiction, then that is considered a substance abuse. It's not a medical use. And it, especially in teenagers and young adults in the home, it can also affect the whole family, and they will also develop problems in the home because of it. So more common than smoking cigarettes and alcohol drinking has been the use of marijuana for underage teenagers. Peer pressure and being bombarded with temptation to try new and dangerous drugs is also another way that substance abuse and drug use affects the family household. Because when the teenager is just being bombarded with temptation to try new dangerous drugs, and the peer pressure, they're stressed, they're going through changes, they're going through, what they're going through, and trying to deal with everything they're going through. And then for the parents, to be pressuring and stressing because of what the teenager's doing, it begins to just impact the whole household. Teens who have witnessed parents are also more prone to use. So when they grow up in the home and they're seeing the parents, they're going to be more likely to go out and use also. So it's called predisposition. That exists too. There's already an environment or a situation that predisposes them to that learned behavior, and then they're going to go out and most likely do the same thing. And genetics can play a role too. So drugs in teens have a direct impact on the family households also. So through what? Through side effects, through the withdrawal, or same things. You see your child suffering, you see your teenager going through different things. Strained relationships will occur. Also, the relationships begin to get strained. Poor school performance, it'll affect them, in their school. Exposure to other drugs. One drug leads to another drug. I remember when we used to use the term that marijuana was a gateway drug that led you to other drugs. But just experimenting for the teenagers exposes them to so many other drugs, and some of the drugs can be very dangerous. So it can also lead to reckless behavior within the home from the teenager, stealing to support a drug habit, running away eventually because they're not, getting their needs now as a drug user in the home. And this brings parental grief. So we see again the whole family being impacted. So if you're in this situation, I just want to, let you know that we're bringing awareness, we're raising awareness. If any of this that I've talked about tonight, some of you have already requested one-on-ones, and I'm going to get back to you in the coming week. But also, if you want more information, you're dealing with a partner, you've had a history, of substance abuse, or any of the things that I mentioned tonight, and you would like a little bit more, support, then let the staff know, talk to the staff, and get a referral, and we will get back to you, and we'll try to set up an appointment and just get you the support that you need. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next class.